Who did this to you? The mountain man's vow that changed everything. He mountain man lived alone in the rugged wilderness. The air was crisp, and the landscape stretched out like an endless canvas of jagged peaks, tall trees, and winding rivers. His cabin, small and sturdy, stood at the edge of a dense forest, far from the nearest town. He had made this place his home, far from the noise of the world. Life had always been simple for him: work the land, hunt, gather firewood, and live in peace. His reputation spread through the local townsfolk, though he seldom ventured into them. He was known as a strong and quiet man, a figure who never sought attention but had earned respect. He didn't have much contact with others, and he liked it that way. The mountains, the trees, the animals, they were his companions, and they never judged him. But one day, that silence would be broken by an event that would change everything. It started early one morning when the mountain man was heading out to check his traps. The sun was barely up, casting pale rays over the snow-covered ground. He trudged through the snow, his boots sinking slightly with each step. The forest was quiet, save for the crunching of snow beneath his feet and the occasional bird call from high above. It was the kind of peace that made the mountain man feel at home. But today, something felt different. There was an odd stillness in the air. It wasn't the usual calm of the forest. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. He pushed on, his senses alert, eyes scanning the trees for any signs of movement. Then he heard it, a faint cry for help. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. But it was unmistakable. Someone or something was in pain. The mountain man froze, his instincts kicking in. His hand went to the knife at his belt, and he began to move swiftly, silently, toward the sound. The cry grew louder, more desperate. It wasn't an animal. It was human. The mountain man's heart raced. He had never expected to encounter anyone this deep in the wilderness. The nearest settlement was miles away, and he rarely crossed paths with strangers. His mind raced as he hurried toward the source of the sound. His legs burned with each step, the snow now feeling thicker and heavier underfoot. He rounded a bend in the forest path, and there, lying half-hidden beneath a pile of leaves and branches, was a person. The sight stopped him cold. The figure was sprawled on the ground, barely moving, their body covered in blood, their clothes torn and ragged. The mountain man's first instinct was to run, to leave this place and avoid the trouble that would surely follow. But something in him refused to turn away. He knelt beside the person, his breath shallow. She was a woman, young, maybe in her 20s, her long dark hair matted with dirt and blood. Her face was pale and she was barely conscious, her eyes fluttering open and closed. Her lips parted, but she couldn't speak. The mountain man could see the fear in her eyes, a deep, raw fear that chilled him to his core. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice rough, barely a whisper. His hands trembled as he gently touched her arm, trying to steady her. The woman's eyes flickered up to meet his, but her gaze was distant. It was clear she was fighting to stay awake. Her lips parted again, but the words came out as little more than a rasp. "Please, help me," she gasped. The mountain man's heart tightened. He had seen injuries before, animals caught in traps, animals wounded by hunters, even the occasional bear fight. But this was different. This wasn't a simple wound. This was something far darker. He knew he had to act fast. There was no time to waste. He reached into his bag, pulling out what little medical supplies he kept for emergencies. His hands worked quickly, carefully cleaning her wounds and applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and he could feel her pulse racing beneath her skin. As he worked, the woman's eyes grew dimmer, her body weaker. The mountain man's heart pounded in his chest. He had to get her back to his cabin where he could tend to her properly. He wasn't a healer, but he knew enough to stabilize her. She couldn't stay out here. Not like this. "Hold on," he muttered to himself, lifting her gently into his arms. He had no choice but to carry her. There was no way she could walk. With every step, he could feel her weight dragging on him, but he pushed forward, focused on the task at hand. It was a long walk back to his cabin. The snow seemed to fall heavier now, as if the very world was closing in on him. The woman in his arms didn't make a sound. He wondered if she was even still conscious, but he refused to stop and check. There was no time. As he finally reached the cabin, he carefully laid her on the bed, his movements urgent but gentle. His cabin was simple, but it was warm, and that warmth was a relief after the bitter cold of the outside world. The mountain man worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging her wounds as best as he could. He lit a fire in the stove and set a pot of water to boil, his mind focused solely on the woman. Through it all, her words kept echoing in his mind. Who did this to you? He couldn't shake the feeling that the question meant more than just a simple inquiry. It was a promise, a vow. Once the woman was settled, he stepped outside to gather more firewood, his mind racing. He hadn't planned on this, hadn't planned on someone appearing at his doorstep, someone who needed his help. But now that she was here, now that he had sworn to protect her, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. He knew he couldn't turn back. When he returned to the cabin, the woman's breathing had slowed. She was still unconscious, but her body seemed to be holding its own. The mountain man sat beside her, the weight of his vow settling on his shoulders. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't let whoever had done this to her get away with it. The question burned in his mind. Who did this to you? As he watched over her through the night, the mountain man made a promise. He would find the people responsible, no matter how dangerous it would be. No matter how far he would have to go. He had made a vow and he would keep it. The next morning, as the woman stirred and opened her eyes, the mountain man was ready. Ready to ask her about the attackers, ready to get the answers he needed to follow the trail. But before he could speak, she reached out with trembling fingers and whispered, "Thank you." The mountain man nodded, his heart heavy. The journey ahead was going to be long, but it had already begun. The days after the woman's arrival at his cabin passed slowly, and the mountain man worked tirelessly to care for her. The weather turned colder and the mountain winds howled outside, but inside, the small cabin was warm. The fire crackled in the stove, and the woman's breathing, though still shallow, had steadied. Each day she became a little stronger, though she remained silent, her eyes often lost in thought. The mountain man spent his time tending to the land around the cabin, chopping wood, hunting for food, and keeping watch for anyone who might come looking for the woman. He knew she wasn't just a victim of random violence. There was something deeper behind her injuries, something far more dangerous. And with each passing day, the question gnawed at him. Who did this to you? One morning, after several days of silence, the woman finally spoke. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it carried with it the weight of a hidden story. "I don't know who," she murmured, her eyes flickering open. "They didn't tell me their names, but they're coming for me, they're coming for both of us." The mountain man's heart skipped a beat. Her words confirmed his worst fear. She was running from someone, but who could be dangerous enough to follow her all the way into the wilderness? And why had she come here to him? The questions only deepened and his sense of responsibility grew stronger. He knelt beside her, his face soft with concern. "Who are they?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. But she just shook her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and fear. I can't say. They'll find me, they'll find both of us if I tell you." The mountain man didn't push further. He could sense the deep terror in her voice, the fear of something far worse than what he had imagined, something far more dangerous. But now he couldn't just stand by. He had made a vow to protect her, and his promise extended far beyond just keeping her safe within the cabin walls. The woman's warning stayed with him as he worked through the day. He couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was coming, that danger was closer than he wanted to admit. He knew he couldn't remain isolated forever. The woman might be healing, but her words, the fear in her eyes, made it clear that the threat was still very real. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the snow, the mountain man made up his mind. He had to leave the cabin and search for answers. It wasn't just a matter of finding out who had hurt the woman. It was about understanding the full extent of the danger and making sure no one else got caught in it. He packed a small bag with the essentials: food, a blanket, a knife, and a map of the surrounding area. His plan was simple: find out who had done this and confront them before they could reach the cabin. The woman was safe for now, but he couldn't wait forever. He had made his vow and he would keep it, no matter the cost. Before leaving, he spoke with her again. She was sitting near the fire, her face drawn but grateful for his care. "Stay here," he told her gently. "I'll return soon. Don't worry, you're safe for now." She nodded but didn't speak. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken trust that had grown over the past days. He had given her care when no one else had, and now she depended on him more than she knew. As he left the cabin, the cold wind bit at his face. The night had fallen quickly and the stars twinkled coldly overhead. He wrapped his cloak tightly around him and set off, walking steadily toward the nearest town, miles away. The journey was long and tiring. He was used to walking these mountains, but this time, the weight of his mission made each step feel heavier. He kept his senses sharp, every crack of a twig or rustle in the brush making him pause, listening for any signs of danger. He couldn't let his guard down, not even for a second. As he descended into the valley, he passed through familiar landmarks: the old stone bridge, the tall pines, the frozen creek where he often went hunting. But today, everything felt different. The silence of the mountains was no longer comforting. It was oppressive, and the farther he walked, the more he began to feel that he wasn't alone. Around dusk, he reached the edge of the town. It was a small place, only a few homes and a general store, mostly used by travelers and hunters. But it was also where the local people gathered and where rumors tended to spread. He knew the place well, though he hadn't visited in months. He made his way to the inn, a simple wooden building with a warm glow spilling out from the windows. As he stepped inside, the warmth hit him like a wave. He looked around, his eyes scanning the room. A few locals sat around the fire, talking quietly, while a couple of travelers played cards at a table in the corner. The innkeeper, an older man with a gruff voice, looked up as the mountain man approached. "What can I get you?" the innkeeper asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he recognized the stranger. "I need information," the mountain man said, his voice low. "About a woman. She's been hurt, and I need to know who did it." The innkeeper hesitated, his gaze flicking nervously toward the people sitting near the fire. The mountain man could tell that something about this conversation made the innkeeper uncomfortable. "What woman?" the innkeeper asked, his tone growing colder. "I don't know her name," the mountain man replied, "but she's been badly injured. I need to know who's behind it. They're dangerous and I need to find them before they come looking for her." There was a long silence. The innkeeper shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room again. "You're not the first to ask about her," the innkeeper said quietly, leaning in closer. "Some men came through here a few days ago. They were asking about a woman too. They're dangerous people." "I don't know much, but I've heard things." The mountain man's interest piqued. "What kind of things?" The innkeeper glanced nervously over his shoulder. "I've heard they're part of a group that runs the region, the kind of people you don't want to mess with. They take what they want, and anyone who stands in their way, well, they don't last long." The mountain man felt a chill run down his spine. These were no ordinary criminals. They were a part of something much larger, something that could destroy everything he cared about. The woman's warning echoed in his mind. "They're coming for me. They're coming for both of us." "I'll need more than that," he said firmly, but the innkeeper just shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I can't say more. I don't want trouble." The mountain man stood up and turned to leave. His mind raced with the new information. The people responsible for the woman's injuries were far more powerful than he had realized. But this was just the beginning. He had a long road ahead of him, and he couldn't stop now. As he stepped back into the cold night, he knew one thing for certain. The hunt had begun, and he wouldn't stop until he found the people who had done this. No matter what it took. The mountain man walked through the night, pushing himself deeper into the unknown. The small town had given him the first real clue, but he knew it wasn't enough. He needed more, much more. And the only way to get that was to keep moving forward, to follow every thread until he reached the heart of the mystery. The next few days were a blur of cold winds and endless terrain. He crossed forests and hills, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of the people who had hurt the woman. His thoughts were consumed with one question: why did they do this? The more he thought about it, the more his instincts told him that the woman's past was tangled with people far more dangerous than anyone he had ever encountered. He had a long way to go, but he couldn't stop now, not when there was a chance to find answers. One morning, after days of travel, he arrived at an old, forgotten village. It was the kind of place most people had forgotten about, abandoned by time and left to decay under the weight of years. The houses were falling apart, the streets covered in weeds and dirt. It didn't feel like anyone had lived there in years, but the mountain man's sharp eyes caught sight of something that made him stop in his tracks. There were fresh tracks in the snow, footprints, and they were recent. His heart quickened. Someone was here. He crouched down to examine the prints. They were heavy, made by boots, not the light, soft steps of someone passing through. These were the marks of people who had come and gone with purpose. And as he followed them, he noticed that they led toward a large, dilapidated barn on the edge of the village. It was there, behind the barn, that he found what he was looking for. A group of men, armed and sitting around a fire, seemed to be waiting for something. The mountain man's eyes narrowed as he watched them from the shadows. There was no mistaking it. These were the people who had been hunting the woman. He could feel it in his gut. He moved closer, staying low and out of sight, his breathing shallow. He knew he couldn't just walk up and confront them. They were dangerous, and he had no idea how many more there were. His mind raced as he weighed his options. If he attacked them now, there was a chance he might get hurt, or worse, killed. And that would mean the woman would be left alone, vulnerable again. He couldn't let that happen. His only choice was to gather information first. The mountain man waited in the shadows, his body tense with the anticipation of what he might learn. The men spoke in low voices, too far for him to hear clearly, but from the occasional word that drifted in the cold air, he picked up on a few things. They were talking about someone important, the woman. His heart sank when he realized they were planning to move soon to track her down. "We need to find her before it's too late," one of the men said, his voice sharp and urgent. The mountain man clenched his jaw. "Before it's too late." It sounded like they weren't just after the woman. They were after something else, something that would make them go to such lengths to find her. Another man spoke, his voice darker. "We can't afford to leave any loose ends. If she talks, we're all dead." The words stung like a slap to the face. They weren't just hurting her for the sake of it. There was something they wanted, something they needed her for. But what could it be? What could be so important that it made these men so ruthless? The mountain man knew he had to act. They were getting closer. If they were going to move on her, he had to beat them to it. He turned and began to retreat into the woods, his mind racing with the need for a plan. As he made his way back toward the village, the sound of footsteps behind him made him freeze. He whirled around, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his belt. But it wasn't one of the men from the barn. It was someone else. A woman. A figure cloaked in a dark hood, her face hidden. "Who are you?" the mountain man asked, his voice a low growl. He wasn't in the mood for games. The woman stepped closer, her movements graceful yet deliberate. She didn't seem afraid of him, which struck him as strange. Most people would be cautious around a man like him. "I'm here to help," she said quietly. The mountain man eyed her warily. Help, how? She took a step forward, pulling back her hood to reveal a young face, sharp and confident. I know who you're looking for, and I know why you're looking for them. His grip on his knife tightened. He didn't trust her, not yet. But something in her eyes made him hesitate. She wasn't just another traveler. She had a purpose. And the mountain man was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, she could help him piece together the mystery he was tangled in. How do you know about them? He demanded. She glanced around as if making sure no one else was nearby. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, I used to be one of them. The words hit him like a punch. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He had been right all along. This wasn't just a simple matter of finding a group of criminals. This was a much bigger problem, one that stretched far beyond what he had imagined. The woman, sensing his confusion, continued, I know what they want. I know what they're after, and I can help you stop them. But you have to trust me. The mountain man didn't answer immediately. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything. But deep down, he knew this was the break he had been waiting for. The woman had been a part of this group. She knew the answers he needed, and now she was offering them to him. If he accepted her help, it could mean the difference between success and failure. Why help me? He asked, his voice low. She gave him a small, tight smile. Because they'll come for me too. And because I'm done running. Her words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't just offering to help him for the woman's sake. She was offering to help him for her own survival. She knew the stakes, and she knew that helping him might be the only way to escape the life she had once been a part of. The mountain man studied her face for a long moment. He could see the weariness in her eyes, the shadows of someone who had been living on the edge for far too long. But he also saw something else, a spark of determination. She wasn't lying. She wasn't just looking for a way out. She wanted to fight back. I don't trust you yet, he said finally, his voice steady. But you're right about one thing, we're in this together now. The woman nodded, her expression hardening. We are, and we'll need each other if we're going to survive. And with that, the two of them began to form an unlikely alliance, one born out of necessity, but perhaps also out of something more. The mountain man knew the road ahead would be dangerous. But with this new ally, he felt that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to stop the men who were hunting them all. The days that followed were filled with a strange mix of tension and determination. The mountain man and the woman, who had introduced herself as Alara, traveled together, keeping to the shadows, always moving forward but never staying too long in one place. Their journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about uncovering the truth and taking down the men who had brought so much pain into their lives. Alara had shared some details about her past, though not everything. She spoke of a life she had once lived with a group that operated in the shadows, a dangerous group that dealt with matters few dared to touch. She had been part of it, caught up in their world, not because she had wanted to, but because there had been no other way. She had been young, and the choices she made had led her down a path she now regretted. But leaving that life hadn't been easy. It never was. The mountain man listened in silence, piecing together the fragments of her story. He knew the kind of people she was talking about. Dangerous men and women who lived by their own code, a code that had no room for mercy. He had seen their kind before. They were the ones who made the rules in the darkest corners of the world. But Alara, she wasn't like them anymore. She had turned her back on that life, and that, the mountain man knew, made her more dangerous to them than any of them realized. One night, as they camped near a river, Alara spoke again, her voice quieter than usual. They don't know I'm helping you, she said, her eyes scanning the forest as if she expected someone to appear at any moment. If they find out, they won't hesitate to kill me. They'll kill anyone who stands in their way. That's how they work. The mountain man didn't respond right away. He was too busy watching the darkness, his eyes sharp for any movement. The air was thick with the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, and the distant howl of wolves. But Alara's words hung in the air, a reminder of the danger that surrounded them both. "They're not just a group of criminals," Alara continued, her voice steady. "They control everything in this area, the trade routes, the businesses, even the law. They've been doing it for years and no one dares to cross them." The mountain man's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. These weren't just ordinary criminals. They had power, influence, and resources. They had been operating in the shadows for so long that no one even knew who they really were, but Alara knew them better than anyone. "They're looking for something," she added, her tone dropping lower. "And I think I know what it is." The mountain man turned to face her, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Alara hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the dark woods before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're after a piece of information, a secret. A secret that could bring down everything they've built, and I've been carrying it with me. That's why they hurt me. That's why they're hunting me." The mountain man was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. A secret that could destroy them all. That was why they were so desperate to find her. It wasn't just about silencing her. It was about getting their hands on something far more valuable. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low and urgent, but Alara shook her head. "I can't tell you, not yet. Not until I'm sure you're ready." The mountain man's frustration grew, but he didn't press her further. He knew Alara had her reasons. She had been through more than he could imagine, and she wasn't about to trust anyone too easily. He respected that. He had his own reasons for being cautious. He had learned the hard way that trust was a rare commodity. Over the next few days, they continued to move deeper into enemy territory. The further they went, the more dangerous it became. They could feel the eyes on them, the lurking danger that was always just out of sight. The mountain man had learned how to live with danger, how to move through it without being seen, but Alara's presence made things more complicated. She was used to moving through the world of shadows, but now she was standing with him, on the front lines of a fight that could cost them both everything. One evening, as they sat around a small fire, Alara turned to him, her face serious. "I need you to promise me something," she said, her voice firm. The mountain man raised an eyebrow. "What?" "That when this is over, when we've finished what we've started, you'll let me go. I can't go back to the life I left behind, but I can't stay here either. I need to disappear. For good." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had known from the start that this journey wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't thought much about what would happen after. They were both here for a reason, to find out who had hurt the woman and to stop the people responsible. But Alara's request made him realize that this wasn't just about vengeance or justice. This was about a life that had already been torn apart, a life that needed to be rebuilt, even if it meant leaving everything behind. He didn't answer right away. His thoughts were tangled, his emotions a mix of sympathy and reluctance. He had promised to protect her, and that promise hadn't changed. But he had to admit, he wasn't sure what would happen when the fight was over. He had no idea if they would survive it, let alone what they would do afterward. "I'll help you," he said quietly, his gaze meeting hers. "But you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Alara nodded, her expression softening for the first time in days. It wasn't much of a promise, but it was enough for now. They both knew that the road ahead was uncertain, but they also knew that they had each other. And that was more than either of them had had in a long time. The next day, they arrived at a town that looked different from the others. This one was bustling, alive with the sound of people going about their daily routines. It felt like the calm before the storm. The mountain man could feel the tension in the air, the quiet hum of activity that hinted at something larger brewing beneath the surface. As they walked through the market square, Alara stopped suddenly, her eyes scanning the crowd. "They're here," she said, her voice barely audible. The mountain man followed her gaze and saw them, two men, standing near the edge of the crowd, their eyes locked on Alara. They were waiting for her. The time for hiding was over. The confrontation had begun. The mountain man's hand went to the knife at his belt, but Alara stopped him with a quick shake of her head. "No," she said firmly. "Not yet. We need to be smart about this." The mountain man hesitated, his eyes never leaving the men. He could feel the storm brewing and he knew they had to act fast. But Alara was right. They couldn't rush into this blindly. They needed a plan. "We'll find out what they're up to first," she said. "We'll find the right moment." And so they waited, watching from the shadows as the two men moved through the market, unaware that their every step was being tracked. The mountain man knew that this was only the beginning of what would be a long and dangerous fight. But with Alara by his side, he felt ready. Together, they would face whatever came next. The tension in the air had never been more palpable. The mountain man could feel it in his bones. They were closing in, and the time for waiting was over. The men who had been hunting Alara were not just looking for her anymore. They were looking for something far more dangerous, the secret she carried, a secret that could bring their entire network crashing down. Alara's calm demeanor had become a strength for both of them. She was no longer just the woman who had been hurt. She was a woman with a purpose, and that purpose had become intertwined with the mountain man's own. Together they had formed a bond, one born of necessity, but strengthened by the shared understanding of what they were about to face. That day, they had followed the two men through the market, moving like shadows. The town had grown busier, the crowd a sea of people rushing through their daily lives. But for the mountain man and Alara, the world had narrowed to the two figures they had been tailing. They had learned everything they could about them: names, affiliations, and the fact that they were part of something far larger than either of them could have imagined. The two men had been making their way toward the outskirts of town, and the mountain man knew it was only a matter of time before they would lead them to the heart of the operation. But there was no room for hesitation. If they waited too long, they might lose their chance. And losing their chance meant not just failure, but something worse. The woman would be captured again, and this time they wouldn't let her escape. When they finally reached the edge of the town, the men stopped in front of a large, weathered building, the kind of place that didn't raise suspicions. A warehouse, perhaps, or a meeting spot. Alara's eyes narrowed. She had been here before. She recognized the building. And the memories it stirred were not good ones. "This is it," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with a sharp edge. "This is where it all started. This is where they hide." The mountain man nodded. He could feel the weight of the moment. This was where it would all come to a head. No more running, no more hiding. He could see the fear in Alara's eyes, but he also saw something else: determination. She wasn't just here for vengeance. She was here to end it, to stop these men from destroying everything. They moved in close, staying in the shadows, careful to make no sound. The door to the building was cracked open, and the mountain man could hear muffled voices inside. He gestured for Alara to stay back. She was the one who knew the most about this place. It was her past, her secret. She had to be the one to face them first. "I'll go in first," she said, her voice steady. "No," the mountain man replied firmly, his hand gripping her arm. "We go together. We're in this together." For a moment, Alara hesitated, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. But she found none. Slowly, she nodded, and together they approached the door. Inside, the building was dim, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. The voices grew louder as they moved through the shadows. The mountain man kept his senses sharp, every muscle tense, prepared for anything. But they weren't just up against the two men they had been following. There were more, several more. The building was alive with the quiet hum of activity, men and women, moving in and out of the shadows, each one playing a part in a larger scheme. It wasn't just a simple operation. It was a network, a web of corruption and power that stretched far beyond anything the mountain man had imagined. And in the center of it all, the person who controlled everything, the leader, the mastermind behind the syndicate. Ilara knew him. She had once called him a friend. But that was a lifetime ago, before everything changed. Now, he was the man who had sent people to destroy her, the man who had built this empire on lies and bloodshed. And now, Ilara was ready to bring it all down. They moved deeper into the building, each step taking them closer to the heart of the operation. The mountain man's hand never strayed far from his knife, and Ilara's eyes were always searching, looking for the man who had once been her ally. Finally, they reached the main room. It was larger than the others, with high ceilings and a long table in the center, surrounded by several chairs. The leader sat at the head of the table, his back to them, speaking to the men around him. His voice was calm, commanding, but the mountain man could feel the tension in the air. This man was dangerous. He was the reason Ilara had been running, the reason this entire conflict had started. But now, there was no more running. Ilara stepped forward, her voice cold as she spoke. "It's over," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The leader turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he saw her standing there, the mountain man by her side. For a moment there was silence. No one moved. Then the leader smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're a fool to come back here, Ilara," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've already lost. You can't run from your past. No one can." Ilara's gaze never wavered. "I'm not running anymore." "And you'll pay for what you did." The leader's expression darkened. "You don't know what you're dealing with. You never did." But Ilara was no longer afraid. She had faced this man before, and she had learned what he was capable of. Now she was ready to finish what she had started. Before anyone could react, the mountain man lunged, his movements swift and precise. The knife in his hand flashed in the dim light as he disarmed one of the men who had stood, reaching for his weapon. The others scrambled, but they weren't fast enough. Ilara moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, her movements fluid as she disabled another man, leaving him unconscious on the floor. The leader rose from his chair, his hand moving to a hidden weapon beneath the table, but Ilara was already there. She had learned from the best, and she wasn't going to let him escape. With a single movement, she knocked the weapon from his hand, her face expressionless. "It's over," she said again, her voice steady. The leader looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and rage. "You think you've won. This is just the beginning." But Ilara was already done. She had taken back control of her life, and she wasn't going to let this man, or anyone else, take it away from her again. The mountain man stood beside her, his presence solid and unwavering, as they faced the wreckage of the life Ilara had once known. The rest of the men were subdued quickly, their plans unraveling before them. The leader, seeing the inevitable, tried to make a last, desperate attempt to escape, but it was too late. The network he had built was crumbling, and there was no one left to protect him. When it was all over and the room was quiet once more, Ilara turned to the mountain man. Her face was tired but resolute. "It's done," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "It's finally over." The mountain man nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful. They had won, but the victory wasn't just about defeating their enemies. It was about reclaiming control over their lives, about breaking free from the shadows that had haunted them for so long. As they left the building, the sun was just beginning to rise. The world felt different now, as if everything had shifted into place. They had fought for survival, for justice, and for the truth, and now they could finally move forward. Ilara glanced at the mountain man, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." The mountain man didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, his eyes distant as if he was thinking about what came next. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "You're not alone anymore," he said. Together, they walked away from the building, leaving behind the past and stepping into a future that, for the first time in a long time, seemed full of possibility.